So another thing we can do in order to simplify our templates is to allow access to variables directly from the template instead of using our request. Let's take a look at hello.php for an example. So instead of using request get here, wouldn't it be cool if we could just use name as a variable? Well, using a combination of a native PHP function called extract and another method with the request class, we can do that. Let's take a look. I'll jump back to our resource pack, and let's open up the 19th step, which is called front.php, extracting variables to use directly in a template. Let's copy this code and paste it over the code that's currently in the front.php file and save it. Now let's look at the differences between this file and our previous one. So I'll choose the 16th step and the 19th step and drag these over to my file comparison tool. So our first change is that we've removed the creation of the response object from the top of this file. Instead of this happening here, we're creating the response inside of this if-then statement where we check to see if the route exists inside of our mapping. The reason for this is that we no longer need this response object inside of our template files, which is why we had this above to begin with. Now it's just a little bit cleaner to set up our response objects right here when we return our template or we return a 404. The next change is that if we assume that all of our pages are going to exist in the same folder, then we're just repeating code here. This dir source pages and then the .php at the end of the file name are all going to be the same, so we're duplicating code by adding additional pages that has that code. So instead, in our new code, what we're doing is just specifying the name of the file without the .php extension, and then we're building up the entire directory here when we include it. Now, instead of map path being the full directory path to our file, it's instead just this little token here. And so what we're going to do is pass that into an sprintf function that will build up this entire directory and then replace the name of the file here with the value from the key inside of our mapper. Other than this part here, this obstart include and response are nearly identical here, except we have one more line that we've added in. You see that this is green, that means that it's been added, and it uses the PHP native function extract. And what extract will do is take all of the key value pairs inside of an array, and it will convert it into actual variables. So if we did a var dump on request query all, we would see an array with key value pairs. The only one that we would be expecting is name, and then we would have the value of name here. Now at this point, we've lost our default setting for our name variable, but that will come later as we evolve this application. So what I mean is that if we don't pass anything to the name parameter inside of our query string, then we won't get a default like we did before. So after this gets processed with extract, there's going to be a variable called name that we can use directly. So it would be just like if we did $name equals and then some value. We now have that value to work with from this point forward. This additional parameter, xtrskip, means that if a variable has been defined already, we won't redefine it, we won't override it. So for example, if there was a path key inside of this request query all, we would not pull it into the path variable, we would leave path as is. So because there hasn't been a name defined yet, we have name to work with from here on. Then we include the file, and we have all of the variables available to us from the extract here. So we can use name directly. Let's take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to go back to the resource pack, and let's open up the 20th step called hello.php, switch to use variables directly. Copy this code and paste it over the code in hello.php and save it. So now, instead of grabbing name from the request, we have it to work with directly right here in the template. So I think this is pretty cool. Some of you may have wondered if you've worked with Drupal before, how those variables get into the template files that we can use. There are all sorts of variables that we can work with. Usually ones like NID or UID. Where do those come from? Well, they come from a process very similar to what's provided to us through the extract function. it makes it a little tricky to track down where this name comes from because there's no name equals line anywhere in our code. But it does make certain things a whole lot simpler. Now, because our by.php file doesn't use any variables, we don't have to adjust anything there.